One of the most exciting buzzwords in this space is IPFS, or interplanetary file sharing. Give it up for Juan Benet, the founder of Protocol Labs, as we go interstellar to learn about the future of file sharing.
Do what you do, don't overthink. I do what I do, all I can do is me. We do it different, a little bit more distinct.
All right, hey everyone. So my name is Juan, as you just heard. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, I think. All right, I'm just going to keep talking and hopefully it goes away. Step back. Is that better? All right. Great. So I'm going to do something that's pretty different from my normal talks. If you've seen me speak before, usually I have a very long slide deck that I kind of blaze through. And I just mash you with a ton of concepts and things. And it's fun for some people, but not others, and so on. But what I want to do today is get you to think about the future and get to think about the importance of the tech that we're building. And this is something that the majority of the people working on the tech right now don't get the time to think about, or the majority of the users looking at the tech that's coming don't get a lot of time to think about. So, looking at the program and so on, we've talked about tokens, we've talked about investments, we've talked about a lot of the practical, direct, momentary value proposition of the entire space. But I want you to get a baseline on the importance of the work that's being done. There's a sense that we can create something really stable for computing globally, that we can fix a lot of the problems of the internet, and there's a sense that we can build something so robust that it's extremely difficult for powerful attackers to take it down. But I want you to viscerally connect with this idea. So I want you to think for a moment, I'll give a little bit of time, and I want you to think for a moment about your personal relationships with other people, your family, your coworkers, your friends, and think about how you have those relationships and how much computing and the internet is a part of those lives. Like, how many times do you message your family over your phone or on email or something like that? When you work, how many times do you rely on some chat system, or you rely on something like GitHub, or you rely on some online medium? If you're like most people in Silicon Valley, and other places in the world, this is increasingly a higher and higher percentage of your life is going through the web in some way. It's going through the internet. It's going through a lot of these data platforms that you have zero control over. And so as you think about these relationships, and as you think about the data that you generate and the data that you send each other and so on, also consider, where is it stored? Who has that data? Like, if you were to visualize the last 10 emails that you sent, where are they stored? Who's got control over? And if something went wrong, like if today the internet just kind of halted for a moment, what would you do? How would you get in contact with your family? How would you get in contact with your coworkers? How would you go about your business? Or your emergency response to the fact that the internet is stopped and this is a crisis now. So we should step back and realize that by this point, by 2017, personal computing and the internet are such an integral part of our lives that we have become completely dependent on it. And it's extremely difficult to dissociate yourself and your daily lives from that. And so it calls into question, where is all this data getting stored? Who does have control over this? What are the failure modes of this stuff? Like, when can I get access to this? How do I govern who looks at all this content? And so this is underwriting a lot of the, or powering a lot of the revolution that you're seeing right now. The impetus to decentralize a lot of stuff, the impetus to make things publicly verifiable, and the whole point of making things not rely on trusted third parties comes from a realization that it's generally a bad idea to place all of your reliance and full trust on entities, no matter how good they are, or no matter how good their track record has been. Because sometimes things can change. Sometimes certain people or groups can get control of those organizations, or more broadly, can gain control of organizations larger than those, and compel them to do certain things. So I think this wasn't so clear to me until I met somebody in Germany who told me interesting stories about how in Nazi Germany, they went through a ton of records, normal census keeping records, to go and find people that they wanted to put in concentration camps. And so you think like this innocuous pieces of data that at the time served a great purpose in society, suddenly were completely corrupted and used for something horrible. So now can you imagine what can happen to all of the data that you're logging constantly? All of your email, all of your personal communications, all of that is getting logged constantly. So how, reflect for a moment, how can people use this stuff in bad ways, right? And so this is why decentralization and taking control of your data is important. Control of your identity, control of what you're sending, what you're signing, what you're declaring to the world is actually coming from you. And it's this it's this reliance on computing that makes us kind of step back and saying, no, we need to build a better system. We need to build layers of computation that do not rely so completely on trusted third parties. And aside from thinking about your day-to-day now and how much you use computing, kind of project into the future. Think about 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, 15, 20. How much will we use computing then, right? I mean, it's only increasing. So unless something tragically bad happens, more and more of our lives are going to go over the wires. And soon we're going to have implants, potentially. Soon we'll have VR and AR ubiquitously. And soon here might be 10, 20 years, but that's a blink of an eye in reality, right? And so the time is now to fix all of this stuff and place a better infrastructure so that we can rely on it with much stronger guarantees. And so the good news, so this is kind of scary, right? And it's like everyone's like, oh no, man, like this is a huge bummer. Like, why are you telling me this at 11 a.m. on a Friday? And I'm saying this because the work that's happening now through things like Ethereum, through projects like IPFS and Filecoin, and things like Bitcoin and a whole bunch of other things in the space are making an improvement, are actually improving the infrastructure layer to prevent a whole bunch of these kinds of attacks and to give you more reliability and resilience when you need it. And so the thing about security is that you never value security until something bad happens, right? So you never really consider security that much until some disaster occurs that costs an enormous amount of money. And this is, you've seen like huge leaks happen, you've seen crypto being broken, you've seen wallets being stolen, and so on. We've seen a ton of things that happen. We need to think about the security of our everyday data in the same way, and the sovereignty of our everyday data in the same way. So things like Ethereum are already putting in place, to a great degree, an uncensorable transaction system where you can send short messages to each other and do small computations with each other. You can do big computations too, but it gets pretty expensive. And that's an extremely powerful primitive. So when you think about computation generally, that's a massively powerful primitive. You need other pieces. You need something like really scalable storage, and so that's what Filecoin and IPFS are about. You also need things like general purpose high performance computation that's decentralized that can rely on things like Ethereum. But you need also an anonymity network that can allow you to send messages to each other in a censorship resistant way. There are a whole bunch of other things that we need. And in fact, all of the stuff that we're building today is mostly for developers. The majority of the tech that's being built right now is the underground, pipes and like foundations upon which buildings and consumer products will be built. So today, the majority of the stuff isn't reaching people yet. Not really. It's reaching some fraction, but nowhere near the level of reach that, say, a social network has, or some application like that. And so we need to get all of the tech we're building into people's hands in that way. And that's going to require a whole bunch of product focus, and focus on mobile, and focus on a whole bunch of pieces of the infrastructure so that we can get there. And so the 3 points that I want to leave you with today are that, first, our future is about computation in a huge way, in ways that much deeper and bigger than it is now. And it's in danger, right? So right now, the way we're headed, and with the tech that we have today and the things that we rely on today, a lot of parties can get involved in stopping your activity or preventing you from doing something or attacking you and so on. And so the future's in danger. The good news is, the second point, the good news is the systems we're building today are making a measurable improvement. Not everything's figured out. There's still a lot of questions, and things are still coming. But we're already making some improvements. However, and the most important one, it's not going to happen or survive unless you take part in it. It's not going to work unless all of you and the people you know are starting to use and build things on these systems. If we don't do that, then this will be a phase, and then a lot of the world will remain in the walled gardens of the world, and it will remain in infrastructure that's worse for them. And so this is a big call to action for the people here to, if you're not working already on this stuff very, very closely, consider it very, very seriously, and consider it just from what impact and benefits it can bring to you, to your family, to your workplace, and so on. And just reflect on the fact that very recently, Turkey blocked Wikipedia, and that was a big deal. And then suddenly Spain censored the referendum, and then sent a bunch of police to stop a democratic vote, unconstitutional democratic vote, but there's a tension there in a very liberal Western country, right? So things may not always be as stable as they might seem, or as safe as they might seem. And so it really the world, or this world, needs your help in order to stay in place, in order to reach its full potential, and in order to reach all of the people out there in the world. Specifically, I would like to call 2018 the year where we really build consumer products on top of all this stuff. It's not there yet. There's a few consumer things, but nowhere near where we need to be. The majority of applications don't quite work yet in mobile, and so on. So let's make it so that by the end of 2018, maybe in a year from now, we can reflect and think, oh yes, now there are massive applications in use by a lot of people around the world relying on this technology, and they're a lot safer for it. So I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to take a few questions about this, or reflections, because I think it's important for you to engage with this thought and to think about it for a second. This is a much more philosophical talk, I guess, but I would like to hear your thoughts. I think back there's somebody with a...
So, if you look at the storage costs on Ethereum, they're, I think, something like $5 million to store 1 gigabyte. Has there been any sort of framework for new protocols coming out on what should be stored on Ethereum versus what should be stored off Ethereum?
Ethereum is not a file system or a database, and it's not you shouldn't treat Ethereum as your disk. You should treat Ethereum as a really great index of data and moving pointers, but you should store large things elsewhere. Of course, it'll be prohibitive to store a gigabyte on Ethereum. You should take a look at IPFS and Filecoin. Those are systems I work on. You should also take a look. There's a bunch of others, things like Swarm, and there's a number of other systems that you can take a look at. So that's kind of that is a very important foundational layer, making sure that you can store things on the network and retrieve them in a censorship-resistant way, and not relying on any trusted third party. Right now, the majority of the data you have relies on 3 parties: Google, Amazon, and Azure. And so those 3 parties control the majority of the web applications that you have, because they have the best cloud systems. So consider that. Any other question or thought? Back there.
I work a lot with database, so I'm just wondering, a lot of people talk about IPFS, Filecoin, Swarm. Can you maybe expand upon maybe what kind of data storage people should be looking for if they're looking at storing more than just files in a decentralized way?
Yeah, so you're saying, what if I don't have files? I have a database, and I want to store users' data and things like that.
Yes, user data.
So these systems are actually, the word file system may not be the perfect, it might be a little bit of a misnomer here, in that IPFS and Filecoin are designed to deal with those kinds of use cases as well. So you will be able to store the data backing a database in those systems. there's a lot of stuff that's improvements that are gonna make that possible and faster. And those systems are not live and scalable and so on. IPFS is live. I think Swarm is also live. Falcon will be coming in 2018. So take a look at that. I can't expand on it now in 2 minutes, but go online. There's a lot of talks about all these systems that go in detail into it. And they also go into detail as to why you want certain properties, right? So commoditizing the storage market is a big deal here. Like making it so that a ton of people that have hard drives around the planet can add those hard drives to the network so that people can store their stuff on them without relying on one single party doing all of that for you. There's another question back there.
So you highlighted a critical piece of our history, which is IBM's using their technology at the time to enable Nazi Germany to do its thing. Can you talk about the importance of the new distributed and decentralized identity standards that are coming out?
Yeah, totally. So I think this is one of my favorite pieces of work that's happening right now. And I think maybe like the flagship project, like broader-based project of projects, is the Rebooting Web of Trust movement, and then things like Uport and Civic, and there's a bunch of other, and Blockstack, and there's a number of other systems. The push right now is to establish a way for you to digitally identify yourself and authenticate yourself, and do everything that has to do with proving that it's you who's doing some action, or proving there's some information claimed about you online without, again, relying on trusted third parties, right? So imagine having selective disclosure so that when you walk into, when you get asked for some information, you can reveal only a proof that that piece of information is correct without having to give everybody all of your data. Think about how many PDF files you've sent with your address, your email, like all your social security number, like everything about you, and you send it on an email to somebody else, and then they keep it in their email and they move it who knows where, and probably it's searchable on Google at some point. So probably don't do that. But the thing here is we are making remarkable improvements in structuring what decentralized identity can look like, and especially I actually think there's going to be a bigger impact in the developing world. So the developing world has a ton of need for being able to identify, like they don't have the same level of record-keeping infrastructure we do, and there we can just leapfrog a lot of that tech to go into this kind of thing, where you can really rely on selective disclosure and not reveal all information and not give it to certain parties that shouldn't have it. All right, one more question and then we're done.
Hi, so these software systems and protocols allow us a lot of leverage against the kind of censorship that you're talking about and resilience, but I'm wondering what happens at the physical layer? What work is there left to do for secure computing and censorship-resistant hardware and networking?
Totally. So if, why work on making sure software isn't owned if hardware is completely owned anyway? It's a great point. So I think where we are right now, you basically have to trust Intel and a couple other players, and if you don't want to do that, you're basically out of the game, out of computing. That's not a great place to be. So I think standards around secure enclaves will help. Much more review over what's happening in certain chips and so on will matter. So part of what we got out of the Snowden leaks was seeing how there's a whole bunch of hardware exploits that people never knew about and allow remote actors to take control of your machine completely without your knowledge or the OS's knowledge at all, effectively turning devices into complete surveillance systems. Or worse, right? It could be worse. So that's kind of like a surveillance agency. Imagine if some other actors that actually want to do something bad took control of all of this. There's these huge botnets that use IoT and so on. So there's that piece. Then there's also, at the connectivity layer, making sure that you have a network that doesn't rely on ISPs that can be coerced by a few parties to do something bad, right? So a lot of ISPs can be coerced to give a copy of all their traffic to certain parties, or can be coerced to stop the flow, right? So in Egypt, we saw this. The government ordered the ISPs to just completely cut off the internet, and that was it. For a while, there was no internet in Egypt. And this happened overnight, right? Like people woke up to no internet, no connectivity. People couldn't talk to their family. They couldn't talk to their friends. Nobody knew what was going on. Everybody flooded to the streets. And that's actually what triggered the revolution, because that was just like the last straw on a whole string of things. So we need a network to we need a physical network for routing messages to be able to emerge that does not rely on the current ISPs. So think about mesh networks and think about long-range wireless and so on. It'd be great if we had, and it's fine if it's super expensive, but if it's at least some way of emailing and sending things like tweets and so on and news anywhere in the world, from anywhere to anywhere in the world, no matter if the local place falls apart. I think Elon Musk's plan to do satellite internet is a really good idea. There's also a whole bunch of, that's hard and not trivial. You have to go and deploy a whole bunch of hardware everywhere. But that circumvents the biggest problem, which is when you're in a country, the pipes out are really easy to cut because you can just go walk around and so on. And you can also triangulate wireless signals. So that might be a good direction. All right, I think we're done. Thank you very much, and consider all this.